Amazing. Thank you very much. Hi everyone. My name is Yejin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a currently third year PhD student at University of Chicago studying social work. Before I joining my program, I was working as campus advocate slash therapist, closely working with student survivors on campus sexual violence, and that became my core research interest. And today, I want to talk about specifically international student and domestic students and their help-seeking patterns and variable barriers. Those are the things that I want to talk to you all in this session. So, to give a little bit of background, international students are fastly growing population in the United States in higher education. We have a little down in a period of time for the COVID, but except that, like the international student number is constantly growing in the United States. And not only the number is growing, all these international students, most of them though from like non-Western countries such as China, India, South Korea, Taiwan. And it means that they are a visible racial minority with distinct cultural background that may need a special attention and then care for this using campus resource, including campus sexual violence related prevention and intervention. But however, current literatures are dismiss this interest in international student a lot of time. There are a few studies focused on international students and mainly on their prevalence of how much of rate of victimization they experience on campus. But even that, most of study are conducted outside of United States, such as Australia, Canada. And there are only few studies conducted in the United States, and they report mixed finding about international students and how they experience campus sexual violence. So it says that we need more attention to this topic, not only the practice, but also research. We have to be more focused on this population where their needs at. In terms of help seeking, there is as far as I know, there is no a specific study focused on campus sexual violence and how their help seeking is shaped for international students. But from any general findings on help seeking, for example, mental health, any general help from the campus or campus resource, these researchers are telling that internationals are less likely to help from the former resource, such as mental health counseling or academic resource. And they report a pretty low level of knowledge compared to domestic students in regarding the services or where they can get the help and all that. And one of really also strong factor for the help seeking is informal help seeking in terms of the campus sexual violence that survivors go to talk to their peers, go to talk to the people they know, not necessarily go through the formal process of it. And we call that informal help seeking. And informal help seeking, we know that how much of social network, the trusted people they have doesn't really matter, but when we see this just overall general adjustment of international student, unfortunately, they are less likely to have a really big social support on campus. So it can also give us the hypothesis that maybe they have a weaker informer help-seeking behavior. So here comes that with my research question then, are there differences in formal help seeking rate between international and domestic student survivor? And are there any differences in informer disclosure rates between international and domestic students? And for those two, for the former help seeking, I wanted to look at how this knowledge levels also then different. And then for the informer disclosure or informer help seeking, I want to see that if the international student actually have different level of understanding of how connected in the campus, how those students are care each other mutually. Those are the level I also really interested to look at as a facilitator for this help-seeking behaviors. The theory that I use to study on this is that one is intersectionality. So recognizing that international students have their multiple overlapping system oppression that as an racially marginalized population, but also as in their status of international student can bring additional barrier in addition to them experiencing campus sexual violence. And also, I was heavily relying on a help-seeking theory that help-seeking behavior can be shaped by their knowledge, shaped by their perception of the resource, those kind of things that I was relying on. So the data that I used to have the conclusion on this research question was the campus climate survey data that collected mainly in 2019. Um, as you know, maybe about this campus climate survey is a national level that they collected data from 33 universities and a lot of students participated in the respond in this survey. So I have enough number of international and domestic students, and here's a measurement analysis that I use that I can happy to discuss in the later if anyone have question. So the sample that I had, so first thing I wanted to start with is that the international and the domestic student sample I have is very distinct and different group of people that I had here. For example, domestic students are mainly white and international students are mainly Asian students, and then domestic students were mainly undergrad, while the international students are widely like graduate student. So those are the things, the meaningful factor that I included as a control variable. So make sure that we see this international status is telling us something. And when I see the comparison between domestic student and international student in terms of knowledge about the service, level of the feeling connectedness, and level of feeling they care for each other on campus, and here's a result that I have. So surprising enough, that international students report significantly higher level of knowledge of campus sexual violence services than domestic students. And they also reported greater perceived connectedness on campus. So they perceive that this college is out there where they're at, their university, or they connected each other closely, and the level of the perception was higher than the domestic students, which was surprising. That is a little different from what the literatures have been saying. But in terms of the mutual care, like whether the students of this university care for each other, was a little bit lower compared to domestic students' answer. So with that note, then another main finding I have in the study is that whether then they have a different level of former help-seeking behavior. So international student survivor in my sample were significantly higher than domestic students who find the formal help seeking when they experience sexual harassment. However, I did not find any differences, like insignificant differences statistically for IPB, sexual assault, and stalking. So that was also surprising that not only international student had a like higher knowledge about the services. In my sample, at least for sexual harassment, international student actually reported higher level of help seeking, especially for formal, which including like counseling centers, Title IX office, or any former office as a form of help on campus that I included as a former help seeking in this study, that they have reported the higher result of it. However, what I really want to stretch out in here is that in terms of informer help seeking or informer disclosure, so the level they reach out to their friends, level reach out to the people that they know, compared to domestic student, international student had the approximately 20% lower informally disclosing their sexual assault or the IPB. So this was an interesting finding that not only that international students perceive that the mutual care between students are lower than domestic students, the show also said that the international students have like less likely to seek help from their informal support system when they experiencing sexual assault and intimate partner violence. So in a conclusion, that my study is still preliminary. There are many things can answer from here, but with this finding, what I want to stretch out is that at internationals would have, at least with my sample, that have a reported more knowledge and perceived like connectedness, but they have a less perception of mutual care among students on campus, and that leading to that international student survivors are more likely to seek more help in case of sexual harassment, but they less likely to seek any help, like informal help, in case of sexual assault or intimate partner violence compared to domestic students. So, what I want to really highlight in here with this finding is that first, that we make it think about the possibility international student needs special consideration in formal help seeking. So, it seems like, unlike other literatures talking about the mental health or general academic support, they seem to have some good knowledge about it and they seem to have like good support in finding formal help seeking. However, they actually need additional support in increasing informal help seeking. They might have reduced level of social support, reduced level of perception of mutual care. Those are really critical factor in terms of we know the survivor healing that have a social support and then have a reliable system to support in from their informal network. So that is something that as in our campus advocates or the prevention specialist or even researcher can go more and directly go think about this, how we can improve the international student survivor and their experience after assault. So that is all I have it prepared, and this is the references. And if you have any question further after this session, here's my contact info. And thank you very much for listening my session.
Thank you. We do have questions we have two questions in the Q&A if we have time. So the first one was, well, I'm not sure when this question came in before your session. Well, I'm not sure when this data was gathered. Did the current immigration climate in the US come up as a factor impacting help seeking one way or the other?
Right. Yeah. So unfortunately, the data itself was collected in 2019, so I don't think that it really indicating and try to answer the questions that you have, but that is absolutely wonderful question. And I do think that that's another reason that we definitely need more studies on this topic, that especially those current climate of like how that adversely impacted international student, how they're maybe limiting the former help seeking that we see in here, a little bit of the positive note that they might defer those impact too. So I think it will be really great to have some qualitative study to listen their story and talk about those.
Yeah, certainly very important. And then the additional question that was in the Q&A, do you have any hypotheses about what could be impacting their perceptions of care/willingness to share with peers? So for
Mhm.
international students.
Yeah, of course. So my hypothesis is that like because my sample of international students in the study was mainly Asian students, and they are mainly graduate students. So graduate students and undergrad students, even though that my study control those variable as an control variable in my study, however, I do think that those cultural dynamic that impact and how their ability to reaching out help from their informal network, that, for example, like cultural stigma about like seeking help, cultural stigma around the sex, stigma around those the word of the rape and sexual violence, and those are the thing I think highly likely impacting on that. So that is something I think that it will be really beneficial to discuss through the prevention or bystander intervention for this particular cultural group on campus will be really great.
Thank you so much. I think that was all that was in the Q&A in the chat, but appreciate this very important work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for attending my sessions. And if you further wanted to have further conversation, I'm happy to. And here's my contact info. And I look forward to see you all in the later sessions too. Thank you very much.